The image that plays over and over in my mind isn't the engagement party. Not at first. It's a far quieter, far more satisfying scene. The inside of Richard Lane's corner office in downtown Atlanta. The skyline shimmered through his floor-to-ceiling windows, a panoramic display of the empire he'd spent years building, or pretending to build. Richard was the kind of man who didn't just wear expensive suits, he weaponized them. A $2,000 tailored navy Armani jacket, matching silk tie, shoes polished to a mirror finish, everything about him screamed success. Or at least, that's how it used to look. But in that moment, under the cold fluorescent light, with the wrong people in the room, it all looked like a costume. Cheap. Hollow. He stood frozen behind his desk, staring at a thick sheaf of papers, a federal warrant. Two men from the U.S. Marshal Service flanked the doorway, impassive, built like they'd been carved out of concrete. The lead agent, a man with a steady voice and a badge that meant nothing good, spoke with the kind of calm authority that made grown men sweat. "Mr. Lane," he said evenly, "as of this morning, all corporate and personal assets listed in this document are being seized pursuant to the attached warrant." Richard's gaze flicked from the warrant to the badge, then to the man's eyes, as though searching for some crack in the armor. "There must be some mistake," he managed, his voice hoarse. "There's no mistake," the agent replied. "This includes your real estate holdings, vehicles, financial accounts, and the property located at 1425 Riverside Drive." He paused before delivering the final blow. The tip that initiated the final stage of this investigation was unusually specific. It included names, account numbers, transaction codes, even the official case file number for Operation Tower. At that, Richard's face went grey, as if someone had pulled the plug and drained all the color from him. He knew exactly what that meant. I wasn't there in person, but I can imagine it clearly. I've imagined it 100 times. The way the air must have shifted in that room. The way the muscles in his jaw clenched, not from anger but from the sudden understanding that someone out there had known everything, and had known exactly where to aim. And that someone was me. To really understand how that moment in Richard's office, that moment when his whole life caved in on itself, came to be, you'd have to go back 10 days earlier. Back to a warm Georgia evening in early June. Back to the sprawling lawn of a rented estate lit by strings of golden lights. Back to the night my sister, Ashley, threw the kind of engagement party you'd expect from the golden child of our family, an event designed not just to celebrate love, but to broadcast wealth. Ashley Lane, née Parker, though she hadn't made it official yet, had been the star since the day she was born. Where I'd been quiet, she'd been magnetic. Where I'd worked in shadows, she basked in spotlights. She shone so brightly she cast the rest of us into shadow, and she knew it. At that party, she floated between guests like she was gliding on rails, champagne glass in hand, her smile perfectly calibrated for each conversation. And then, as always, she found me. I was talking to one of Richard's business associates, a polite man who'd asked me, "So, what is it you do?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Ashley's laughter cut across my words like a blade. "Oh, Mel," she said, still smiling at him as though I weren't even there, "she's got some cute little government job. Pushing papers, making coffee for the big shots. We're so proud she has a hobby." The man chuckled politely, clearly uncomfortable, and excused himself. Ashley's smile didn't falter. "That wasn't necessary," I said quietly. She tilted her head in mock confusion. "What wasn't?" "I'm just telling people the truth." Then she was gone, moving on to her next audience, leaving me standing there with the bitter taste of humiliation settling in my mouth. But that was only the beginning. 2 hours later, in a heated discussion over the seating chart, apparently I'd placed one of Richard's golfing buddies too far from the open bar, Ashley's face twisted into something meaner. Sharper. Fueled by too much champagne and years of believing she was untouchable, she stepped toward me. "You are ruining my night," as she shouted. "You've always been jealous." Before I could react, her hand was in my hair, yanking hard enough to send a flash of white-hot pain across my scalp. Gasps erupted from the guests nearby, but no one moved. Not one of those 80 people, all friends of hers or Richard's, did a single thing. And then our mother, Linda Parker, appeared. I thought for one brief, foolish second she might tell Ashley to stop. Instead, she gripped my arm hard enough to bruise and leaned in so close I could smell her perfume. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed. "Apologize to your sister. Right now. You know how important this day is to her." I looked from Ashley's smug, triumphant smirk to my mother's cold, unyielding eyes. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had bent and bent for years, went perfectly, terrifyingly still. They thought this was just another petty family drama. They thought I'd stay quiet, as I always had. They had no idea they just handed me the one thing I'd been waiting for, the last missing piece. People like to think we live one life, one neat timeline with tidy labels. Mine was split down the middle like a classified file with a public cover page. The cover page was what my family knew: Melanie Parker, quiet, single, doing something with the government, the sister who never made a scene unless Ashley needed one to win. The real file began behind a steel door that hissed when it sealed and left no doubt the world outside didn't exist in here. At 0600 the Monday after the party, Norfolk was already muggy, the kind of damp heat that sticks to your uniform even before the first cup of coffee. I passed the gate, returned the salute, and badged through 3 security checkpoints. Past the last turn was the SCIF, a windowless room that smelled faintly of ozone and overworked electronics. There were no cell phones here, no smartwatches, no conveniences that could betray a secret. Only the glow of monitors, the rhythm of filtered air, and the quiet competence of people who understood that silence is a form of courage. I logged in. The screen unfurled the skeletal map I'd been building for months, thin grey lines branching into thicker ones, nodes labelled with sterile names that hid very human greed. Operation Tower pulsed in the top left corner, a steady heartbeat. Financial flows from Shell LLCs in Delaware. Wire transfers batch structured just below regulatory radar. A boutique bank in Florida unusually fond of ignoring suspicious activity reports. And near the periphery, a name that had once made my stomach drop: Richard Lane. "Morning, Captain," said Major Priya Shah, sliding a folder onto my desk. She ran liaison for our joint cell, Army Intel, DOJ's Financial Crimes Unit, and the DoD Inspector General. She had the patient eyes of someone who'd seen patterns long before anyone else believed they were there. "Morning," AI answered. "Overnight pulls?" Fresh SARS subpoena returns, plus social media captures from Lane's circle. She hesitated. "You good?" I knew what she meant. Not a "you tired" or "did you sleep," the kind of "you good" that compared the bruised crescent under my hairline to the reports on my screen. "I'm good," EI said. "Let's work." At 0700, Colonel Avery Thompson stepped in, 30 years in uniform, iron grey hair, and a tone that made chatter die mid-sentence. He didn't waste anyone's time with small talk. Brief me. I stood, palms flat on the table. The wall display bloomed with Richard's world. Primary front remains Lane Meridian development. AI began, zooming to the central node. Legitimate projects serve as camouflage for capital layering through 3 feeder LLCs: Caraway Holdings, East Lake Point Partners, and LMD Logistics. We've matched vendor payments to a closed-loop set of contractors with phantom headcounts and recycled invoices. Thompson's arms folded. Source of funds: predominantly diverted escrow, construction drawers padded with addenda, and private loans backed by inflated appraisals. We've also identified cross-border wires to a payment processor that launders through high-yield crypto accounts. Then returns as consulting fees. Bank cooperation? Reluctant, a prior said dryly. But the subpoenas woke them up. I clicked to a timeline. We've waited for a trigger indicating willful commingling of illicit capital for personal influence. 10 days ago, at a public event, Lane displayed assets inconsistent with declared income, a curated fleet of vehicles, a $600,000 engagement ring, and rental of a property through a chain of shells we've connected to the same wash. That event produced 70+ witnesses and extensive media captures. Prior gave me a side glance that said, "If you need to step out, I've got this." I didn't step out. I kept going. The behavior pattern at that event also shows coercive social leverage attached to the assets, intimidation used to enforce social dominance. It isn't a finance felony by itself, EI added, anticipating the colonel's eyebrow, but it closes our intent gap. He's not just hiding money, he's using it as a weapon. A slow nod. Recommendations, Captain? I tapped the last slide, a checklist so clean it looked inevitable. Coordinated seizure under Title 18 authorities, accounts, vehicles, real properties. Parallel knock and freeze at corporate HQ and the Riverside Drive residence. And one more thing, submit an intelligence referral through TEC system with high priority triggers tied to our case file, so nothing gets misrouted. Thompson's gaze held mine. Conflict of interest? The question I had been expecting since Richard's name first appeared on my web. I didn't blink. I have walled off personal knowledge. My participation is limited to analytic production. I haven't touched overt action or witness contact. Prior audits my work stream. If you want me out, sir, I'm out. He considered me for a beat too long, then turned to Prior. Audit satisfied? Prior's answer was immediate. Yes, sir. Her work stands on data. Full traceability. Thompson grunted. Then we move. I want a clean clock sync with DOJ and Marshals. H-hour in 10 days. 10 days. The same number that would carry me from a lorn full of lantern light to the sound of a warrant laid on a glossy wood desk. When the room emptied, I sat back down and let my lungs catch up to my body. The cursor blinked in the referral form, a small, patient metronome. I began to write, the way I always do, fact first, feeling nowhere. Summary. Open source and subpoena-derived indicators support probable cause that Lane Meridian Development and associated entities are conduits for layered capital from illicit sources. I salted the text with what I knew the system prioritized: statute references, control numbers, precise entity names. I listed the cars, the ring, the property, the transfer cadence. I did not mention my sister. I did not mention the handful of hair I still found on my pillow that morning. Pain became a data point. Humiliation, a footnote with a URL. At 11:30, my secure line buzzed. I answered. Captain Parker. Director's office. It came a calm voice. Go. Please notify the director that time-sensitive open-source intelligence related to Operation Tower will hit TEC system shortly. There's Nexus language to public coercion relevant to ongoing financial activity. Understood. I hung up, read the document one more time, and hit submit. The screen flashed, and the referral was gone, absorbed into the machinery that makes promises quietly and keeps them without applause. By 1600, I was back in my apartment. I showered, let the hot water find the bruise along my scalp, and watched a single strand of hair swirl toward the drain. I ate standing at the counter, 2 forkfuls of cold pasta, a glass of water, nothing to taste. My phone lit up with photos from the party. Ashley in a sequined dress, Richard with a grin he'd bought and paid for, my mother, perfect posture, perfect pearls. I muted the thread and opened my laptop again. I didn't write a diary entry. I wrote a checklist. Freeze order matrix finalized. Riverside Drive chain of title, last 5 years, confirm links. Vendor loop, tag all invoices with duplicate hash. Contingency, if Lane attempts a bridge loan through private lender. Flag UCC filings. Personal, change the lock screen. New password. New quiet. The city hummed beyond my window, indifferent and reassuring. Tomorrow would be more subpoenas, more rejects rules, more pixels turning into proof. I was not angry. Anger clouds edges. I preferred edges sharp enough to cut. That night, for the first time in months, I slept 8 hours without dreaming. In the military, 10 days is enough time to mount a campaign, reprecision units, and execute with precision. In civilian life, it's enough time for people to forget they ever humiliated you. But in my world, the one my family didn't know existed, 10 days was just enough to build the perfect convergence. After submitting my intelligence referral, my life settled into the quiet rhythm I preferred. Mornings began in the SCIF, where the hum of secure servers was as familiar as ocean surf. Data packets streamed in from cooperating agencies, bank compliance dumps, shell company registry pulls, customs declarations, all raw or that needed refining. The night of the party kept replaying in the periphery of my mind, but it no longer stung, it served a function. Every sneer, every order to apologize to your sister, it had transformed into a line item in my operational plan. It wasn't anger fueling me anymore. It was clarity. By day 2, the referral had been assigned a red priority tag in the Treasury Enforcement Communication System. That meant automated routing to joint financial crime teams. The flags I'd embedded, specific statute citations, the exact bank account cluster, the already validated shell names, were doing their job. This wasn't a tip from an embittered relative. It was a surgical strike from inside the machine. I didn't need to chase updates. I knew how the process would unfold. First, the financial forensics units would validate the anomalies. Then, subpoenas would hit the relevant banks. The marshals would coordinate with DOJ Asset Forfeiture Council. By day 10, both Richard's office and his Riverside Drive property would be under federal seal. On day 3, Priya slid a flash drive across my desk without a word. In our line of work, that silence meant read this, and keep your expression neutral. I plugged it into my air-gapped terminal. It was surveillance imagery, Richard at a private airport, stepping off a Gulf Stream with 2 men already in our crosshairs. Their offshore brokerage was part of a laundering corridor we'd been mapping for a year. The timestamp on the photo was from 3 weeks earlier, well before the party. It was almost poetic. Even as Ashley paraded him as her perfect fiancé, he'd been stepping deeper into the network that would take him down. Day 4 brought a small, personal test. My mother called, her voice bright in that forced way that told me she was either with friends or in front of Ashley. "Melanie, you know Ashley's been under stress with all the wedding planning. I think you should send her a note. Just to smooth things over." There was a time I'd have argued, or worse, complied. Instead, I said, and noted, "Mom," Erin let the silence hang. I wasn't going to waste breath explaining that the only thing I was smoothing over was probable cause. Day 6, the SCIF's Situation Board glowed with new movement. The DOJ liaison dropped a note in our secure chat. Subpoena served. Full bank records inbound. Priority review. The net was tightening. I didn't even have to touch the case directly anymore. The system was following the trail I'd left like a bloodhound. That night, I sat in my apartment, polishing my boots. A habit from deployment days, soothing in its ritual. People think in military intelligence means constant action, but in reality, it's long stretches of patience punctuated by decisive moves. You prep, you wait, and when the window opens, you move without hesitation. On day 8, I ran into a junior analyst in the hallway. Bright kid, new to the unit, still learning how to wear his badge without looking at it. I heard ear about the Lane thing. Is it true you knew him personally? His voice had that mix of curiosity and apprehension. I kept my tone even. In this job, you'll analyze data on people you've met. Places you've been, maybe even things you've lived through. The discipline is knowing where the line is and not stepping over it. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't fully grasp it yet. He would. By day 9, I'd stopped checking the clock. The machinery was in motion now. Search warrants drafted, tactical teams briefed, vehicle seizure orders queued. The marshals would go in at 0900 sharp, 2 teams hitting 2 locations simultaneously. And me? I'd be in the SCIF, just another officer at her station, eyes on a monitor, watching nothing and everything at once. The last night before impact, I stood at my window, looking down at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Ashley was probably finalizing the wedding invitations. Richard was likely reviewing some glossy investor packet for a project that would never break ground. They were both at the peak of the hill, smiling for the crowd. In 10 hours, the descent would begin. And I wouldn't have to lift a finger. The morning of day 10 began like any other, at least, for me. I was at my desk in the SCIF at 0700, nursing a mug of coffee so strong it could strip paint, reviewing a different case file entirely. Outwardly, nothing in my posture suggested today was any different from the hundreds before it. But behind the glass walls of my mind, the clock was ticking towards something irreversible. The marshals had their orders. The DOJ team had their warrants. The bank compliance officers had already frozen certain accounts in anticipation of asset seizure. Even if someone tried to warn Richard, it would be too late. The machinery was moving at a speed no single phone call could stop. At exactly 0857, I swiped to a secure LiveOps feed. I wasn't in the field, but I'd arranged to have access to status pings from the tactical teams. The channel showed 2 blinking indicators, Team Alpha at the Lane Meridian Development Headquarters downtown, and Team Bravo staged outside the Riverside Drive estate. The first update came at 0902, Alpha on site. Entry achieved. Warrant served. I pictured it clearly, the glass doors parting to admit 4 figures in dark suits, their IDs flashing with the kind of authority no receptionist dares to question. Richard, probably mid-sentence on some boastful phone call, looking up to see the lead agent place a thick packet on his polished desk. Mr. Lane, the agent's voice would be neutral. We are here pursuant to a warrant issued by a federal magistrate judge. We are seizing all assets listed herein, pending ongoing criminal investigation. I imagined his expression shifting, annoyance, then confusion, then the slow, rising panic when he heard the words highly specific tip containing Operation Tower's case number. The moment he understood that whoever had reported him knew exactly where to look. At 0904, the second ping appeared. Bravo on site. Occupants present. Warrant served. I didn't need video to see it in my mind. Ashley, still in silk loungewear, hair half-pinned for a bridal trial run, opening the massive double doors with a frown. My mother right behind her, already drawing herself up to full height, prepared to scold whoever dared disturb their morning. The lead marshal's voice would be just as calm as Alpha's. This residence was purchased using a network of shell corporations tied directly to our investigation. As of this morning, it is property of the United States government. You have 1 hour to collect personal effects and vacate. I could all but hear Ashley's voice pitch upward, demanding to know who authorized this, insisting they were on private property. My mother's clipped tone threatening to call the police, and not understanding the badges in front of her were the authority they meant to invoke. At 0907, my phone, locked down to the secure line, buzzed with a notification from an unsecure number. I didn't have to look to know who it was. I let it buzz twice before answering. Her voice was shrill, a tangled mess of sobs and outrage. Melanie, you have to do something. Your government friends are here, taking everything. They're saying the house belongs to the government. I waited until she'd run out of breath. Are you referring to agents from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office? I asked evenly. There was a pause. What? How do you know that name? I let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. I know it, Ashley, because for the past 2 years, I've been the lead analyst on Operation Tower, the federal task force investigating Richard's finances from top to bottom. The line went so quiet I could hear her breathing hitch. Somewhere in the background, my mother's voice broke in. Who is it? What did she say? I kept my tone clinical, almost bored. When you attacked me at that party, you and Mom showed me exactly how willing you were to protect the culture Richard built. I didn't call my friends. I filed a formal intelligence submission detailing how my own family was benefiting from and enabling a federal target. The system took care of the rest. Her voice cracked. You did this to us? I didn't raise mine. No. Ashley. Richard did this to you. You just helped me prove it. I ended the call without waiting for her reply. At 0920, the final pings came in. Alpha complete. Bravo complete. Premises secured. The operation was officially over. The warrants were served, the assets tagged and inventoried. Both scenes were now in the long, grinding hands of federal procedure. I logged out of the LiveOps feed and returned to the other file I'd been reviewing, my face as unreadable as ever. Around me, the SCIF hummed with the usual low conversation, keyboards clicking, printers spitting out classified reports. No one here knew that the case we'd just executed was more than professional to me. And I intended to keep it that way. By 1700, news alerts began trickling in. The language was sanitized, as it always is, real estate developer under investigation for financial crimes. Assets seized in coordinated federal action. No names yet, but the photos gave it away. Richard's sleek black Bentley being loaded onto a flatbed, agents carrying out evidence boxes from his glass-walled office. I shut my laptop and left without comment. The job was done. By the next morning, there was no containing it. Richard's name was splashed across the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, WSB-TV's morning broadcast, and half a dozen local news blogs that specialized in sensational real estate gossip. The headline was almost bland. Prominent developer faces federal investigation. Assets seized. But the photos told the real story. One showed his Bentley, hood gleaming in the Georgia sun, chained to a flatbed like a captured trophy. Another caught him mid-stride leaving the federal building, suit wrinkled, jaw set in a line that screamed barely controlled panic. And then there was the shot that really made the rounds. Ashley on the front steps of the Riverside Drive estate, hair disheveled, eyes red, standing beside our mother. Behind them, U.S. Marshals methodically carried labeled boxes into black SUVs. The caption read simply, "Occupants vacate property following federal warrant." I didn't have to check social media to know the ripple effect. The city's brunch crowd, the same one that once fawned over Ashley's curated Instagram feed, was dissecting every frame of those photos over mimosas. Some would feign sympathy. Most would relish the fall. At 0830, Priya passed my desk in the SCIF. She didn't slow down, didn't even look at me, but as she passed she murmured, "A clean hits on every warrant. DOJ says your referral was bulletproof." I kept my eyes on the financial flows streaming across my monitor. Good to hear. The truth was, I didn't feel triumphant. The satisfaction had already come and gone in the moment I ended Ashley's phone call. Everything now was just process. By midday, the first major outlet outside Georgia picked up the story. CNBC ran a short segment, "Federal Task Force Executes Coordinated Seizures in Multi-Million-Dollar Fraud Probe." The anchor's voice was smooth, detached, explaining that investigators suspected a complex layering of illicit funds through legitimate development projects. I'd written those exact words in my report. Hearing them on national television was surreal, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. It belonged to the system now. That afternoon, my secure inbox pinged. Internal DOJ summary. Preliminary interviews confirm extensive commingling of funds. Subject Lane offering partial cooperation. Partial cooperation. Translation: Richard was talking, but not enough to save himself. He dangled just enough names and documents to try for a plea deal, hoping the prosecutors would bite. They might, if what he offered was valuable enough. But no matter what, the empire he'd built was gone. At 1800, my unsecure phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew the voice instantly. My mother. Melanie, as she began, her tone that brittle mix of accusation and wounded dignity. This is all such a misunderstanding. Richard's lawyer says there's been a terrible mistake. Ashley is beside herself. We just need to. I cut her off. You're calling me for what, exactly? To fix this, she said, as if it were obvious. You have connections. You can tell them this isn't what it looks like. I let a beat parse. It's exactly what it looks like. And there's nothing to fix. Melanie. She sounded shocked, as though my refusal was the true betrayal here. We are family. I almost laughed at that. Almost. Family doesn't drag each other across lawns in front of 80 people. Family doesn't belittle your work for years. And family doesn't expect you to cover for federal crimes because it's inconvenient to be caught. There was silence, heavy and hostile. Then she tried a different tactic, the guilt play. I don't know what's happened to you, but you've changed. This isn't the sister I raised. I kept my tone even. You raised someone who stayed quiet. That's not me anymore. I ended the call before she could respond. That night, I stayed late in the SCIF, combing through unrelated case files, letting the familiar flow of structured data clear my head. Numbers don't judge. Transaction logs don't try to gaslight you. They just tell the story as it is. By the end of the week, Richard's face was everywhere. The legal filings had gone public, and the indictment was coming. I read the sanitized press statements and thought about the hidden hours, the subpoenas, the analyst huddles, the filtered air of the SCIF where the real war had been fought. The public saw the fall. I'd seen the erosion, the cracks spiderwebbing long before the first piece fell. Ashley's Instagram went dark 2 days after the raid. No more brunch photos, no more shots of her bridal journey. She vanished from the feeds of the people who used to orbit her, as if removing her from their curated lives would erase the association. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel much of anything. What I did feel was the deep, steady certainty that I'd done exactly what needed to be done, and that nothing my mother or sister could say would change that. In my world, we call it operational closure. Outside of it, people just call it peace. 2 weeks after the seizures, the indictment dropped. It came through my secure feed first, a 64-page document stamped in bold, United States District Court, Northern District of Georgia. Charges: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, money laundering, and multiple counts under Title 18 for the structuring of transactions to evade reporting requirements. I scrolled through the pages like an archaeologist examining a dig site I'd mapped in advance. There were the Delaware shell companies, the falsified invoices, the off-the-books e-consulting payments routed through Caribbean intermediaries. Each section read like a chapter I'd already written, only now it was written in the language of prosecution. Richard was named as the lead defendant. 2 of his so-called business partners were listed as co-conspirators. Ashley's name didn't appear, but the document made clear that he associates he had benefited from the proceeds of the fraudulent scheme. I knew exactly who that meant. By noon, every major outlet had the story. CNN ran a segment titled From Skyline to Scandal: The Fall of Richard Lane. Footage of the Bentley on the flatbed played in slow motion. CNBC had a panel of analysts speculating how someone with such a high-profile image could have kept these operations hidden for so long. I could have answered that in one word: arrogance. At 1400, I was summoned to Colonel Thompson's office. I stepped in, saluted, and waited for him to speak. He held the indictment in one hand, a manila folder in the other. "Good work, Captain," he said. "Your analysis made this case airtight. DOJ specifically mentioned your intelligence package as the linchpin in their probable cause argument." I inclined my head. "Just doing my job, sir." His mouth ticked upward, almost a smile, but not quite. You did more than that. And because of it, we're recommending you for promotion. Major Parker. For a moment, the words didn't register. Promotion wasn't on my radar. I'd been too focused on seeing this case through. But as it sank in, I felt something different from satisfaction. It was recognition, the kind I'd never gotten from my family, the kind that came not from blood ties but from merit. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, he said. You earned it. I left his office with a manila folder in hand. Inside was the formal notice of promotion, effective next quarter. It also came with a new assignment, Deputy Chief of Forensic Financial Analysis, a position that would have me mentoring junior analysts and overseeing multi-agency task forces. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, the promotion letter on the table beside my untouched dinner. I thought about the years of being dismissed, minimized, told my work was a cute or a hobby. Those words had bounced around my head like shrapnel for so long I'd almost believed them. Now, they felt small. Powerless. 3 days later, the plea negotiations began. Richard's attorney floated the idea of cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. DOJ was willing to listen, but their terms were steep: forfeiture of all seized assets, full disclosure of overseas holdings, and testimony against his co-conspirators. Word reached us through official channels that Richard had agreed. He'd served time, likely a decade, but he'd be spared the maximum. For Ashley, the fallout was social rather than legal. Her wedding was, of course, cancelled. The high society friends she'd cultivated evaporated overnight. Those who didn't block her outright kept their distance, afraid proximity might taint their own reputations. I didn't hear from her directly, but I knew she was still in Atlanta, living in a small condo she hadn't posted online. The only direct contact came in the form of an email from my mother. It landed in my personal inbox late on a Friday evening. The subject line was "We need to talk." It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was 3 paragraphs of reframed history, how she'd only ever wanted what was best for both of you, how things had gotten out of hand, how maybe if we'd all handled it differently and none of this would have happened. Then came the ask, Ashley is struggling. I'm asking you, as her sister, to help us figure out what to do next. 5 years ago, that email would have torn me apart. I'd have read it over and over, twisting myself into knots trying to find a way to fix what wasn't mine to fix. Now, I felt nothing. No anger, no guilt, no pull to reply. I opened a new folder in my inbox, titled "A Case Closed," and dragged her message into it. Then I shut my laptop and went to bed. The following Monday, I reported to my new office on base. It wasn't large, but it had a window, something the SCIF could never offer. From my desk, I could see the flag at the main gate, moving slightly in the morning breeze. On the wall behind me, the promotion certificate hung in a simple frame. My team began arriving in 2s and 3s. Young, eager analysts with fresh clearances and bright eyes. They didn't care about my family history or the names in the headlines. They cared that I could teach them how to trace a hidden account through 6 jurisdictions, or how to spot the one false inverse in a stack of 1,000. This was my new family. And in their world, my value wasn't up for debate. The first morning in my new role felt different before I even walked through the gates. I'd worn the uniform 1,000 times, but the new rank insignia on my shoulders caught the light in a way that made me stand a little straighter. The guard at the checkpoint saluted with sharper precision than usual, and I knew he'd read the promotion bulletin. My office wasn't large, but it was mine. A single window framed a slice of the base, hums rolling past, flags moving with the breeze, cadets jogging in formation. It wasn't the panoramic skyline Richard once boasted about, but it was real. Solid. It stood for something beyond appearances. By 07:30, my new team began filtering in. Fresh-faced analysts, some from military backgrounds, others from civilian agencies temporarily embedded here. They brought coffee, energy, and a certain nervousness. Newcomers always wonder if their new boss will be a tyrant, a ghost, or something in between. I greeted each one, learning their names, asking what cases they'd worked on before arriving. Most were mid-tier investigators used to sifting through endless spreadsheets and suspicious transaction reports. I could see the eagerness in their eyes when I mentioned multi-agency task forces and high-level asset forfeitures. Here's the first thing you all need to know, I told them once everyone had gathered around the long conference table. We deal in facts, not feelings. We're not here to speculate about guilt or innocence. Our job is to follow the data until it either proves something or it doesn't. The second thing you need to know: every detail matters. A $2 discrepancy can open a $1 million door. There were nods all around. Some scribbled notes. I moved to the whiteboard and drew a simple diagram: circles, lines, arrows. You'll be tempted to think of financial crimes as boring. Just numbers. But what we're doing here, I tapped the board, is dismantling power structures. Quietly. Methodically. You'll never get applause for it. But you'll sleep at night knowing the bad guys don't. It wasn't a speech about Operation Tower, but the undertone was there. My story was proof of what I was saying. By the second week, we were knee-deep in 3 ongoing cases, one involving procurement fraud in defense contracting, another focused on cryptocurrency wash trades, and a third on a cross-border art smuggling ring. I assigned tasks based on each analyst's strengths and made sure they understood not just the what but the why of every move. The work was demanding, but the camaraderie was genuine. We celebrated small wins, an intercepted wire, a key subpoena return, with cheap coffee and worse donuts. Jokes about obscure banking statutes became our inside language. This wasn't the brittle, conditional acceptance I'd grown up with. This was a team built on trust and competence. Meanwhile, Operation Tower moved toward its conclusion in court. Richard's plea deal was finalized: 10 years in federal prison, forfeiture of nearly all assets, and mandatory cooperation in related investigations. Watching it unfold from the periphery, I felt no urge to be there in person. I didn't need to see him in an orange jumpsuit. The victory had never been about spectacle. One Friday afternoon, as I was reviewing a suspicious wire trail on my monitor, my secure phone lit up. It was Priya, her voice carrying the blend of satisfaction and finality only an investigator can truly understand. "Towers officially closed," she said. DOJ wrapped the last related indictment this morning. Textbook finish. Your original package is still the gold standard they're citing in interagency briefings. Good to know, I replied. You get any downtime before your next one? She laughed softly. You know better. That weekend, I went for an early run through the base's perimeter trail. The air was crisp, the kind that fills your lungs and makes you feel like you could keep going forever. Halfway through, I realized I wasn't thinking about the past anymore. Not Ashley, not my mother, not the night of the party. For the first time in years, my mind wasn't divided between two worlds. But the past wasn't completely finished with me. 3 weeks later, as I was leaving the commissary, I saw her. Ashley. Standing near the parking lot, wearing oversized sunglasses that didn't quite hide the fact she'd lost weight, her posture no longer radiating the unshakable confidence I remembered. She was alone, holding a grocery bag that looked too light to be worth the trip. We locked eyes for a fraction of a second. She opened her mouth like she might say something, but then she didn't. She turned and walked quickly toward her car, head down. I didn't call after her. I didn't follow. Some confrontations happen in words, others in silences. That one was over before it began. Back at my apartment that night, I thought about the way she'd looked, not out of pity, but with the cool detachment of an analyst noting a change in a subject's demeanor. She wasn't the center of the universe anymore. She was just another person navigating the wreckage of her own choices. And I was no longer a bystander in my own story. Winter came early that year, the kind of cold that sharpens everything: the air, the sounds, even the way light hits the buildings on base. My office window framed a pale sky and a line of leafless trees swaying gently against it. Inside, my team worked in quiet concentration, their monitors glowing with the latest case files. Operation Tower was officially over, yet the reverberations still reached me in small, unexpected ways. An email thread forwarded from DOJ thanking all contributing agencies. A mention in a quarterly interagency meeting of the exemplary intelligence work that streamlined probable cause. My name didn't make the news stories, and that was exactly how I preferred it. One Tuesday afternoon, as I was finishing a review of procurement fraud invoices, my unsecure inbox pinged. The sender, Linda Parker. My mother. The subject line, "We need to talk. Please read." I clicked it open. It began with a story, her story, about how things had been hard since the investigation. Ashley was struggling to find her footing. People they thought were friends had turned their backs. There were references to how fast everything happened and how maybe we could have handled things differently as a family. I could see the patterns instantly, reframing, minimizing, shifting blame to circumstances rather than choices. The third paragraph was the ask. It wasn't subtle. I'm asking you, as your mother, to forgive, to let this go, and to help us figure out what comes next. I leaned back in my chair and let my eyes rest on the framed certificate behind me. Major Melanie Parker, United States Army. 5 years ago, I would have read this email over and over, searching for some opening where reconciliation could live. I'd have felt the old ache, the pull to fix, to smooth, to keep the peace at my own expense. But now, I felt nothing. Not anger, not joy, just the clear, even certainty that my peace no longer depended on their understanding. I opened a new folder in my inbox, typed "case closed," and dragged her email into it. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond. It was archived, like a finished file. That night, I stayed late in the SCIF, working through the details of an art smuggling case. The younger analysts had gone home, the hum of the air filtration the only sound. I thought about how far I'd come from the days of being the quiet one at the dinner table, to this, the final authority on cases worth millions, trusted with decisions that could ripple across agencies and even borders. The next week, I was asked to give a briefing at a joint training seminar for interagency financial analysts. The topic: turning open source intelligence into actionable leads. I built the presentation around anonymized examples, but in truth, much of it came directly from what I'd done in Tower. As I spoke, I scanned the room, men and women from different agencies, some in uniform, some in civilian suits, nodding, taking notes, asking sharp, relevant questions. When the session ended, a young woman from Treasury approached me. She looked barely out of grad school, but her questions had been precise. "Major Parker," she said, how do you stay clear? I mean, when the data you're working with involves people you know, or situations close to you." I thought about Ashley, about my mother, about the night of the party, the feel of my hair being yanked, the burn in my scalp. And then I thought about the moment I'd clicked submit on that referral. "You focus on the facts," I told her. "You draw the line between what's personal and what's professional. And you never cross it. The facts will protect you from doubt, and they'll outlast anyone's opinion." She nodded slowly, like she understood more than she'd expected to. The following Saturday, I woke early and drove out to the Blue Ridge Mountains. It had been months since I'd taken a real day for myself. The trail was quiet, the ground dusted with frost. As I hiked, I let my mind wander, not to cases, or emails, or headlines, but to the crisp sound of boots on frozen leaves, the rhythm of breath in cold air. At the overlook, I sat on a rock and watched the horizon shift with the sun. From up there, the valleys and ridges stretched endlessly, their scale dwarfing every petty squabble, every false hierarchy I'd ever been subjected to. I realized something then. It wasn't just that I'd closed the book on my family's drama. I'd rewritten my own story entirely. I wasn't the underestimated one anymore. I wasn't even the quiet one. I was the one who saw the truth, acted on it, and built a life from the ground up on integrity instead of approval. By the time I made it back down the trail, I knew with certainty I didn't need another conversation with Ashley or my mother to feel complete. I didn't need their acknowledgement. The closure wasn't in anything they could give me. It was in what I'd already taken for myself, the freedom to live without their narrative. When I got home, I poured a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and opened my work laptop. A new case file waited in my secure queue. Another puzzle to solve, another truth to uncover. And that, I thought, is exactly how I want the story to keep going. The first time I ever saw a federal warrant served, I was a brand new intelligence officer, still trying to keep my uniform crease perfect and my voice steady in briefings. It had felt monumental back then, a display of law and order I'd only read about in training manuals. I'd stood in the background, observing, quietly absorbing how precise and deliberate every move was. Now, years later, I understood something those early days never taught me. The real power isn't in the knock at the door, or even in the confiscation of assets. It's in the quiet work that happens long before, the months of tracing one transaction to the next, the careful building of a case so airtight it doesn't matter how loudly the guilty protest. That's what Operation Tower had been. And it's why, when I thought back to Richard's face in that downtown Atlanta office, ashen, lips pressed thin, eyes darting to the federal seal at the top of the warrant, I felt no gloating. Just the clean satisfaction of a job done right. Life after the case settled into a steady rhythm. My team thrived. They began closing cases faster, their analysis tighter, their confidence higher. Watching them work reminded me why I'd accepted the promotion. The best part wasn't being a Major Parker or having a window in my office. It was seeing others grow into the kind of analysts who could, one day, build and close their own tower. But every now and then, the past would brush against me, a shadow at the edge of my vision. One afternoon, while reviewing subpoena returns, my secure line rang. It was Priya. "Got a funny one for you," as she said, voice carrying a hint of irony. You know the annual interagency gala? Guess who's on the guest list this year? I didn't have to guess. Ashley. Bingo. Looks like she's reinvented herself. New branding. Some charity work. She's going by her maiden name again. I almost smiled. Good for her. And I meant it, not as approval, but as acknowledgement that everyone has their own way of surviving a fall. I didn't see her at the gala. I stayed in the circles that mattered to me: DOJ liaisons, Army CID representatives, a couple of Treasury agents swapping war stories about the worst cover names they'd seen in fake corporations. It struck me how natural this world felt now. How, once, I'd kept it hidden from my family like a secret life. Now it was simply my life. A week later, as I was leaving the base, I drove past a strip of storefronts and spotted her through a coffee shop window. Ashley sat alone, nursing a drink, scrolling through her phone. She looked ordinary. No flashbulbs, no curated audience, no performance. For a second, I wondered if she'd seen me. But I didn't stop. That moment confirmed something I'd known for months. Closure isn't about grand speeches or confrontations. It's about reaching the point where you can parse someone who wants to find your story and feel no urge to step back into theirs. One Friday evening, I stayed late in my office to finish a risk assessment for a defense contractor. The base was quiet, the corridors half-lit. Outside my window, the flag at the gate stirred in the wind. My inbox chimed with a new message from Priya. Heard your name come up in DC again. Tower case is now a training example. They're calling it a model for interagency intel flow. I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. Not because I needed the praise, but because it meant the work had a life beyond me. It would outlast the headlines, the gossip, and the people who tried to diminish it. Before I shut down for the night, I opened their case-closed folder in my personal email. My mother's last message still sat there, untouched since the day I'd archived it. I hovered over it for a moment, not to read, but to remind myself that the file stayed closed because I said so. As I powered off the lights and locked my office, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who sat at family dinners, quietly accepting dismissive smiles, convinced that approval was the same as love. I didn't resent her. She'd carried me through years of silence, waiting for the day I was ready to speak in a way no one could ignore. And when that day came, she stepped aside so I could do it. Now, I don't replay the night of the engagement party anymore. I don't need to picture the marshals at Richard's office, or the look on Ashley's face when she heard my voice on the phone. I've lived those moments, and I've moved past them. What I replay instead is something quieter. A young analyst knocking on my office door, asking for advice. A case file clicking into place after weeks of dead ends. A base at dawn, the flag lifting in the morning wind, a reminder that service, done right, isn't about applause. In this life, I've learned your value isn't decided by who you know, but by what you know and the integrity with which you use it. That's the metric I'll live by. And that's the part of the story I'll keep writing. Every day.